Sophie woke to the soft spill of morning sunlight across her bedroom floor. Outside, the suburban street hummed quietly. Birds flitting, mailboxes catching the golden light, a neighbor walking a dog. The ordinary beauty of the day felt comforting, almost too perfect, like a photograph that didn't allow for the edges to fray. She lay in bed a few moments longer, savoring the quiet and the gentle rhythm of their domestic life. Ryan's footsteps echoed in the kitchen, a familiar cadence. She could hear the faint scrape of his chair, the rustle of the newspaper, the soft whistle of a tune she could almost recognize. For months, she had settled into the unspoken comforts of their life. Warm breakfasts, shared errands, lazy Sunday mornings. Everything seemed seamless, yet, this morning, something tugged at the edges of her contentment, a whisper of déjà vu she couldn't name. Getting out of bed, she dressed slowly, deliberately. She noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her hands trembled ever so slightly. It was unremarkable and profound all at once, the way anxiety could slip into ordinary moments, undetected until noticed. She told herself it was irrational. Ryan was here, he was hers, and yet, some part of her mind churned uneasily, like a shadow flickering at the edge of perception. In the kitchen, Ryan hummed as he poured coffee. His movements were deliberate, precise. The tilt of the cup, the fold of his sleeve, the careful placement of the sugar bowl. Sophie watched him, a small smile tugging at her lips, but beneath it, a question she refused to ask. It was a dangerous question, one that might shatter the illusion she had carefully curated. "Good morning," he said, voice low, warm, and yet layered with a familiarity she could not place. "Morning," she replied, voice soft, almost automatic. Her eyes followed his hands, the way he moved around the kitchen, noting details she could not name. Over breakfast, they exchanged casual updates about work, errands, and mundane plans for the weekend. Sophie noticed the ease in his words, the comfort in his gestures, but there was also a subtle, almost imperceptible echo, something she couldn't quite identify. A tilt of his head, a laugh too familiar, a phrase she remembered from years past. She dismissed it, telling herself it was coincidence, but the feeling lingered, stubborn and insistent. Later that morning, Sophie found herself sitting alone on the couch, tracing the seam of the cushion absent-mindedly. Memories of Alex, her college boyfriend who had vanished without explanation, crept into her consciousness. She recalled his laughter, the tilt of his head, the rhythm of his voice, the warmth of his presence. And now, in Ryan, she sensed echoes of him, small, fleeting, but unmistakable. She recoiled slightly, trying to push the thought away. It was unfair, irrational. Ryan was here, alive, present, and real. He had built this life with her, shared this apartment, this bed, these mornings. The echoes of Alex should not matter. And yet, they did. The shadows of memory stretched long and intrusive, overlaying their perfect mornings with the weight of absence and unspoken questions. By midday, Sophie had retreated to the bedroom, journal in hand. She scribbled frantically, a mixture of notes, reflections, and confessions. Her handwriting was jagged, hurried, a reflection of the storm inside her. She wrote about the strange familiarity in Ryan's gestures, the dissonance in his smiles, the inexplicable pangs of nostalgia she could not deny. She paused, pen hovering over the page. The thought that had haunted her for weeks now surfaced fully. Could Ryan be Alex? Could he have returned, wearing a new face, speaking in a new voice, and erasing the years in between? The question was absurd, almost laughable, yet the nagging feeling refused to dissipate. Evening descended, soft and golden, painting the apartment with long shadows. Ryan leaned against the kitchen counter, casually scrolling through his phone, unaware of the intensity of Sophie's gaze. She studied him, each line of his face, each movement, each inflection of voice, measuring, comparing, remembering. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in and forces reflection. "Everything okay?" Ryan asked, glancing up. His concern was genuine, yet it stirred the conflicting emotions inside her: love, suspicion, nostalgia, and fear. "Yes," she said, though the word felt hollow. Her internal monologue, vivid and relentless, ran, "I want to trust him. I want to believe in this life we've built. But the past, it lingers. It's waiting in the corners, in the half-smile, in the whisper of a memory." That night, as she lay in bed, Sophie felt the familiar warmth of Ryan beside her, the softness of his breathing, the rhythm of his heartbeat. And yet, in that warmth, a fracture existed, small, almost invisible, yet undeniable. Love and unease intertwined, forming a delicate tension that Sophie could neither escape nor fully embrace. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to float between the present and the past, between the comfort of what was real and the haunting question of what was possible. Tomorrow, she thought, I will confront the whisper. I will ask the questions I have avoided. And with that resolve, she drifted into a fitful sleep, the edges of her perfect illusion already beginning to crack. The weekend arrived quietly, with the same muted rhythm as every other. Sunlight filtered lazily through the blinds, and the faint scent of brewing coffee mingled with the soft rustle of newspapers. Sophie observed Ryan as he moved around the kitchen, loading the dishwasher with the meticulous care she had always admired. Yet, now, every gesture was filtered through her unease. It was the tilt of his head, the slight curl of his fingers when he held a plate. The cadence of his hum, small, seemingly innocuous details, but they struck her with an uncanny resonance. She felt the tug of memory, a strange familiarity that gnawed at her, whispering impossible possibilities. She shook her head, telling herself it was coincidence. She had been reading too much into nostalgia, she thought, assigning meaning where there was none. Still, she could not escape the feeling that something lay beneath the surface, waiting to be unearthed. Later, as Ryan settled onto the couch to read, Sophie wandered into the bedroom to retrieve a spare charger. She rifled absent-mindedly through the drawer where Ryan had placed his essentials, a cluttered assortment of cables, receipts, and loose papers. That was when she found it, a photograph, folded carefully, almost reverently. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. There he was, Alex. Young, vibrant, smiling in the way only he could. The photograph was a relic from a life she had thought closed, a memory she had carefully shelved. Her heart hammered in her chest, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a forbidden longing. She pressed the photograph to her chest, staring at it as if it might speak, as if it might offer an explanation that reason could not supply. Ryan appeared behind her in the doorway, his expression caught between casual curiosity and subtle apprehension. "Found something?" he asked, voice carefully neutral. Sophie held up the photograph, her fingers shaking. "Who is this?" The words escaped before she could think, sharp and demanding. Ryan's face remained calm, but his eyes darkened with the weight of unspoken truth. "I suppose it's time you knew," he said quietly. There was a hesitation in his voice, the kind of pause that speaks volumes more than any words could. "There's more to my past than I've told you." Sophie's stomach turned. She wanted to step back, to retreat from the confrontation she had long sensed was inevitable. But curiosity, mingled with fear, anchored her in place. "Explain," she said. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's complicated. I wasn't always Ryan. I was someone else. Someone you knew. Someone you loved." Sophie's breath caught. Her mind raced, trying to bridge decades and memories in the span of a heartbeat. "What do you mean?" she whispered. Ryan met her gaze, eyes steady and raw. "I was Alex, the man in that photograph. But I had to disappear. I had to change, to become someone you could love again." Sophie staggered back, the world narrowing to the single, impossible fact. The man she had married was the boy she had loved and lost years ago. Everything, the gestures, the cadence, the hum of a tune he sang absent-mindedly, snapped into focus. It was him, and yet, it was not. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the photograph still clutched in her hand. Why would you do this?" Her voice was trembling, both in rage and in disbelief. Ryan knelt beside her, gentle, careful. "I was afraid of losing you forever. Afraid that the person I had been wouldn't be enough. So I became someone else. But the love, that never changed." Sophie stared at him, trying to reconcile the warmth in his words with the deceit embedded in his actions. Memories of Alex flooded her mind, the laughter, the whispered promises, the nights spent talking until dawn. And now, overlaying those memories, were the shared breakfasts, the folded shirts, the hums and gestures of Ryan. Two lives entwined in one, irreparably complex. The hours passed in tense, loaded silence. Sophie's thoughts were a tempest, oscillating between fury and nostalgia, longing and betrayal. She wanted to scream, to throw the photograph across the room, to demand answers in a torrent of emotion. Yet, she also wanted to understand, to know the man who had returned to her life, shaped by years and transformation. That evening, they sat together on the couch, the photograph resting on the coffee table between them. Ryan explained the years of absence, the surgeries, the reinvention. He spoke carefully, slowly, aware that each word was a shard of truth that could either heal or destroy. Sophie listened, torn between disbelief and fascination, her heart alternately aching and softening. They did not resolve everything that night. Sophie could not. Trust was fractured, delicate, and yet fragile threads began to weave between them. Small gestures, a hand brushing a shoulder, a shared glance, a soft sigh, became evidence of something enduring beneath the layers of deception. For the first time in weeks, Sophie allowed herself a small measure of hope. Perhaps love, complex and burdened, could persist. Perhaps the past, though shadowed, could coexist with the present. And perhaps, with honesty and care, the fractures might one day be repaired. Yet, as she drifted into uneasy sleep, she knew the journey ahead would be fraught. Every conversation, every choice, every glance would carry the weight of their intertwined histories. She was stepping into a delicate negotiation with love, trust, and identity, one that would test the boundaries of her heart and the strength of her resolve. The night air was heavy with the scent of rain as Sophie sat on the couch, photograph of Alex in her lap, fingers tracing the edges. Ryan stood across the room, the weight of years and unspoken truths pressing down on him like an invisible burden. Silence stretched between them, a taut cord ready to snap. Sophie finally spoke, her voice low, trembling, almost fragile. "Tell me everything." Ryan hesitated, swallowing. He walked slowly toward her, sitting beside her but keeping a careful distance. The room seemed smaller now, suffused with anticipation and fear. "Everything?" he asked, as if repeating the word could somehow make it bearable. "Yes, every detail," Sophie said, not meeting his eyes. "I need to know. I can't live in half-truths anymore." Ryan nodded, taking a deep breath. He began quietly, methodically, the words tumbling out in measured fragments. He told her about the life he had left behind, the mistakes that had driven him away, the fear that his past self, Alex, was insufficient to win her love again. He spoke of the surgeries, the new identity, the painstaking reconstruction of his life, all for the chance to be with her once more. Sophie's hands gripped the photograph tighter. "So, all of this," she whispered, gesturing at him, at their apartment, at the life they shared, was a lie. Ryan shook his head, his voice earnest. "Not a lie," he said. "It was a rebirth. I never stopped loving you. I only changed to survive the years apart, to be someone worthy of your love." Her mind spun. Memories collided. Alex laughing in the sunlit campus courtyard, Ryan folding shirts in their apartment kitchen. The gestures, the cadence, the familiar smiles, everything suddenly aligned in a disorienting flash. It was him, and yet, it was not. Sophie's chest tightened, anger surged, raw and bitter. "You deceived me, every moment, every touch, every word, you were hiding the truth." Tears welled, blurring her vision. Ryan reached for her hand, tentative, careful. "I know," he whispered. "I know I hurt you. I can't undo it, but I am here now. All of me, for you." The room felt charged, electric and fragile. Sophie wanted to recoil, to push him away, yet the echo of the past, the love that had never fully faded, tugged her closer. She looked at him, searching for the boy she had loved, the man she had married, and the stranger who had become both. She remembered the long nights of college, the conversations that had stretched until dawn, the laughter and the promises. And now, overlaying that memory, were the domestic rituals of their shared present, the breakfast plates, the folded shirts, the quiet hums. Two lives intertwined in one, impossibly complex, irreversibly fused. Sophie drew a shaky breath. How'd I trust you? Ryan's eyes softened. One day at a time, he said simply. I will answer every question. I will be transparent. I will do whatever it takes. But I can't force trust. You have to choose it, slowly, on your own. She nodded faintly, unsure whether to believe him or not. The tears streamed freely now, a mixture of rage, sorrow, longing, and something fragile she could not name. I don't know if I can, she admitted, voice breaking. You can, Ryan whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Because love isn't perfect, it's messy, and this is messy. But it's real. They sat in silence for a long while, the only sound the soft patter of rain against the window. Sophie's mind oscillated between fury and forgiveness, between the past and the present. She thought of Alex, of Ryan, of all the versions of him that had existed and coalesced into this moment. At one point, she buried her face in her hands. Why did you do it? She asked again, the question barely audible. Ryan's voice was soft, almost a confession. Because I couldn't stop loving you. Because I wanted a second chance, even if it meant becoming someone else entirely. The truth hung between them, heavy and tangible. Sophie felt the fractures of trust, the jagged edges of betrayal, and the faint pulse of something enduring beneath, the authenticity of his love, the honesty finally laid bare. The night stretched on, long and reflective. They did not resolve everything, did not reconcile fully, but the confrontation had created a foundation. Sophie realized that understanding the past, no matter how painful, was the first step toward navigating the present. By the time the rain ceased, Sophie's chest felt slightly lighter. She knew the journey ahead would be treacherous, filled with doubt, testing, and slow rebuilding, but for the first time, she allowed herself a glimmer of hope. Hope that love, even fractured, could endure. Hope that truth, though belated, could forge a new path. Hope that they could find a way to coexist, not erasing the past, but living with it fully, authentically. And for the first time in weeks, Sophie felt the tentative stirrings of trust, fragile yet undeniable, like sunlight piercing a dense canopy, hinting at warmth beyond the shadows. The morning light spilled across the apartment, warm but tempered by a lingering chill of unease. Sophie stood at the kitchen counter, stirring her coffee absently, while Ryan quietly set the table. Silence had become their companion, not as oppressive as before, but charged with cautious awareness. The days since the revelation had been a delicate negotiation, each moment carrying the weight of trust and the memory of betrayal. Ryan had agreed to full transparency, answering questions, sharing details of his past, and laying bare the truths he had long concealed. Sophie, in turn, had begun to test the boundaries of her own capacity to forgive, to observe not only words but actions, gestures, and patterns that had once seemed mundane. They had started with small routines, carefully orchestrated. Breakfast together became a ritual not of casual companionship but of deliberate presence. He poured the milk just as she liked it, she smiled at his attentiveness rather than at the habit itself. Laundry, once an unremarkable chore, became a shared exercise in cooperation, each folded shirt and matched sock a subtle reaffirmation of connection. The act of rebuilding trust was slow and meticulous, Franzen-style, emphasizing ordinary gestures that carried emotional weight. A hand brushed a shoulder not casually but with intentional care. A shared glance held more meaning than a declaration of love. Even a soft sigh at the end of a long day conveyed acknowledgement and understanding. Sophie's internal monologue captured every nuance of this process. The tension between lingering suspicion and the stirrings of hope, the oscillation between resentment and the desire for intimacy, the fear that one misstep could undo the fragile web they were weaving. She documented these reflections in her journal, writing feverishly at night, each word a map of her emotional landscape. One afternoon, as Ryan worked on assembling a new bookshelf, Sophie watched him from across the living room. His hands moved with familiar precision, measuring, adjusting, steadying. For a moment, she allowed herself a breath of normalcy, appreciating the quiet domestic rhythm. But the memory of the photograph, of the years he had hidden, surfaced immediately, reminding her that trust was still conditional, fragile. "Are you watching me?" Ryan asked lightly, sensing her gaze. Sophie smiled faintly, placing the journal aside. "Just noticing," she replied, deliberately neutral. The small exchange was a test, a way to gauge the authenticity of his presence and her own emotional response. Evenings were now reserved for candid conversations, where every topic, from work stress to trivial annoyances, became a potential bridge for rebuilding intimacy. Ryan spoke openly about his fears, about the years he had lost, and the constant anxiety that Sophie might reject him if the truth emerged. Sophie, in turn, voiced her doubts, her moments of lingering mistrust, and her cautious hopes for the future. These dialogues were not dramatic. They were slow, careful, intentional, Franzen-style, every pause, every inflection, every sigh weighted with meaning. There were setbacks. Sophie found herself recoiling when Ryan hummed a tune that matched Alex's. Ryan hesitated when recalling moments from his past that overlapped with Sophie's memories. Each instance triggered waves of doubt and questions, requiring patience, reflection, and repeated affirmation. Yet, with each challenge, small victories emerged. A shared smile after a tense conversation, a gentle touch during a quiet evening, laughter over an inside joke. They became markers of progress, subtle but profound indicators of healing. Sophie began to notice patterns not in the gestures themselves but in the consistency of Ryan's attentiveness, the deliberate care he took in aligning his actions with his words. As the weeks passed, their domestic life transformed. No longer merely routines, the mundane became symbolic. Making coffee together was a pact of shared presence, folding laundry together a ritual of cooperation, walking to the local park a testament to gradual reconnection. Franzen-style introspection captured Sophie's awareness of the fragility of these gestures, the consciousness of every choice, and the tentative rebuilding of emotional infrastructure. At night, Sophie often reflected on the paradox of trust. It was both delicate and resilient, fragile and enduring. She realized that reconciliation was not about erasing the past but about acknowledging it fully, negotiating its presence in the present, and finding room for love to persist despite the fractures. Ryan, for his part, demonstrated a patient attentiveness that mirrored Sophie's cautious openness. He listened without defensiveness, responded without pressure, and consistently chose honesty over avoidance. His gestures, once mundane, now carried deliberate significance, reinforcing the fragile web of trust they were constructing. By the end of the month, Sophie could smile at Ryan without the sharp edge of doubt, though memories lingered. Trust had been re-established incrementally, like bricks laid carefully in a wall that might crumble without constant attention. Yet, in these deliberate moments, there was hope, and the beginnings of something sustainable. A love tempered by honesty, resilience, and recognition of imperfection. Sophie's journal entries, once anxious and conflicted, now reflected subtle joy, tempered by caution but open to possibility. She documented small triumphs, a shared meal without tension, a conversation concluded with understanding rather than argument, a gesture that spoke louder than words. Each was a step forward, a testament to the capacity for human connection, even after betrayal. And so, the apartment, once a stage for subtle suspicion and quiet unease, transformed into a living space for deliberate intimacy. Domesticity itself became a crucible for emotional repair, a slow dance of gestures, words, and silent affirmations that redefined what it meant to trust and to love. As Sophie lay in bed that night, Ryan beside her, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The fractures of the past were still there, jagged and unhealed in places, but the effort to rebuild had begun to solidify into something tangible. She reached for his hand, feeling its warmth, its familiarity, and its newfound honesty. For the first time since the revelation, Sophie believed, not with certainty, but with cautious optimism, that love could survive deception, that intimacy could be reclaimed, and that two people could navigate the treacherous waters of the past to find a fragile, resilient present. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, soft and forgiving, as Sophie made her way to the kitchen. The apartment, once shadowed by doubt and hesitation, now felt quieter in a way that was comforting rather than tense. Ryan was there already, unpacking groceries, his movements deliberate but unhurried. It had been weeks since the revelation, the confession that Ryan was Alex, the man she had loved in college. The initial shock, disbelief, and anger had given way to a tentative rhythm of trust and reconciliation. Each day, they were learning not just to coexist, but to live with honesty as their guiding principle. Sophie poured the coffee, watching Ryan arrange the produce with careful attention. There was a new lightness to his gestures, a subtle acknowledgement of the fragility of the past and the responsibility of the present. She smiled faintly, not without memory of the pain, but with a quiet acceptance that healing was possible. They had established routines deliberately, weaving honesty into the fabric of domestic life. Conversations that once skirted truths now embraced them fully, and gestures, once mundane, carried meaning. A touch on the shoulder, a shared glance across the kitchen table, the quiet hum of a song remembered from college, all became threads in a tapestry of renewed connection. Sophie found herself reflecting often, documenting the nuances of their life in her journal. The entries were no longer frantic or fearful but observant and reflective, capturing the subtleties of trust being rebuilt. She wrote about laughter that now carried relief instead of tension, about arguments resolved through dialogue rather than suspicion, about moments when Ryan's attentiveness was a quiet testament to his sincerity. Even when doubt flickered, as it inevitably did, they faced it together. A memory triggered by a familiar tune or phrase no longer spiraled into distrust. Instead, it became an opportunity for conversation, for shared acknowledgement of their complex history. Franzen-style introspection highlighted the ordinary as profound. Folding laundry, preparing dinner, walking in the park, they were not just chores but acts of recommitment. One afternoon, Sophie and Ryan walked to the local park, hands loosely entwined. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet earth and leaves. They spoke of the mundane, work, errands, a neighbor's dog, but beneath the surface, every word was layered with understanding, every silence with consent to be vulnerable. Sophie realized that living truthfully required more than disclosure. It demanded constant mindfulness, the courage to face imperfections, and the willingness to forgive both others and oneself. The past could not be erased, and the years apart were irrecoverable. Yet, love, when aligned with honesty and presence, had the capacity to endure and transform. Returning home, they settled into the living room, each occupying their respective corners yet aware of the invisible thread connecting them. Ryan picked up a book, Sophie her journal. The quiet was not oppressive, it was a shared space of understanding, a recognition of the delicate balance they had achieved. That night, as Sophie lay in bed, Ryan beside her, she allowed herself to reflect on the journey they had undertaken. Love, she realized, was not a static perfection but an evolving commitment, forged in the crucible of human complexity. It required patience, forgiveness, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. She reached for Ryan's hand, feeling the warmth, the certainty of his presence, and the honesty that now defined their relationship. "I still have doubts," she whispered, voice soft. "I know," he replied, fingers tightening gently around hers. "And that's okay. Doubt doesn't erase love, it tests it. And I'll be here for every test." Sophie closed her eyes, letting the sensation of trust and vulnerability wash over her. The fractures of the past remained, but they were no longer obstacles. They were reminders of resilience, of endurance, and of the conscious effort required to sustain love. In the days that followed, they continued to navigate life with the same attention to detail that Franzen-style narratives emphasize. Domesticity became their canvas. Preparing meals together, tending to plants, organizing books, walking to the park, laughing over small jokes, supporting each other through stress and fatigue. Every act, ordinary in appearance, now carried emotional resonance, reinforcing the foundation of honesty and mutual respect. Sophie's journal reflected the transformation, entries chronicling moments of connection, recognition of imperfections, and acknowledgement of growth. She wrote about trust as a practice, not a guarantee, and about love as a conscious choice, renewed daily through intention and presence. By the end of their first month living truthfully, Sophie and Ryan had achieved a balance neither had thought possible. They had confronted the ghosts of the past, faced the consequences of deception, and found a way to coexist in a reality shaped by honesty and resilience. The final night of the month, they sat together in the living room, soft lamplight casting gentle shadows. Ryan reached for her hand, their fingers entwining naturally. "We're doing this," he said simply. Sophie nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "Yes, we are," and in that quiet affirmation, they discovered the essence of love reborn, imperfect, deliberate, and enduring. The past remained, but it no longer dictated the present. Together, they had learned not just to survive the fractures of identity and deception, but to build a life rich with honesty, intimacy, and the quiet joy of shared human experience. The apartment, once a place of tension and secrets, now echoed with warmth, laughter, and deliberate presence. And for Sophie, the most profound revelation was this: love, when lived truthfully, was not an illusion. It was the courage to face reality, embrace imperfection, and choose connection every day.